Jason Cremay with the Bipartisan Policy Center. So, in the kind of polarized, caricatured climate debate, big oil occupies a kind of unique place in the minds and hearts of a lot of the environmental community. And it's gotten worse, not better. I think, and I won't go too far in my own kind of personal views, but it seems to me like all the focus on trying to relitigate the past is not actually driving us very effectively towards the future. But you are bringing a very different kind of ethos to this discussion as the CEO of one of the largest oil and gas companies in the world. Do you get invited to the Houston Club? How do you...
No. There's a lot of things I get left out of.
But so talk a little bit about just, how much the kind of ideals that you're bringing to this discussion actually resonate with your peers. Do you really feel like you are in just a fundamentally different kind of thought process? And how do you fit in?
Well, I would first I'd like to talk about how excited I am about our organization. This is not the Occidental, this is not your grandfather's Occidental, nor your father's Occidental. We have progressed a long way over the past few years, and we now have, it's part of our progression was started with our former CEO, Steve Chazen, but we now have an organization throughout that is very willing to admit climate change is happening. It is occurring. We think it's a waste of time to argue about whether or not we need to reduce emissions, CO2 emissions by 1.5 TCF a day or 2 TCF a day. The reality is we got to get started today, and we got to do it as quickly as we can, and we've got to be as efficient because it's got to be a sustainable process. And it's our staff, it's our organization that has that passion and that heartbeat and that commitment to be a part of the solution, not to continue to be a part of the debate of the past. That should be behind us now. And there are some people in our industry that are committed, that are doing the right thing. And I would say, though, the problem is there are not many U.S. oil and gas companies. John Minjay is here with BP. BP is one of the companies that I respect a lot. Bob Dudley, I just talked to him. Bob Dudley was at the Vatican meetings with me and with some others. The only two companies invited from the United States were us and Exxon. But BP was there, and Shell was there, Equinor was there, Eni was there. There are some the European companies, oil and gas companies, are generally ahead of the United States companies. And so we tend to collaborate more with them than with the companies here in the United States because they have a more forward-looking view of what we need to do in our industry to lessen our impact on the environment. And so, but there are some, I wouldn't say that I can't generalize our peers here in the United States completely because there are some that are committed. And I think you're about to hear from some, but there are some that are very committed, and we're happy to be a part of that group. So anyway, it's a part of our character now, and so it's not led from me, it's not led from the top, it's grassroots within our organization, and that's what's been the fun of being a part of this and being in this role now.
One in the back, right here.
I'm really excited to hear about the interest in saline storage going forward. What's the key driver for you to do that switch from EOR to saline? Is 45Q enough? Do you need a low carbon fuel standard?
We're going to need, there's going to have to be a price for carbon, ultimately. Whether it's, I'm not familiar enough with how cap and trade could drive that as much as I've given a lot more thought to carbon pricing and a carbon tax of some sort. But that's going to have to exist because there has to be some incentive for that to get done. And the way we feel like we could be a part of that is, I think every company realizes if you don't have a core competence, you probably shouldn't be trying to do something. Our core competence is handling CO2, so we want to be able to provide that service. For it to be possible to make it economical for the company capturing it and for us injecting it, that's a scenario where we can't pay for the CO2. So there's got to be enough incentive for the company to be able to get some advantage by installing the carbon capture and then paying us, in that case, our cost to inject it in the saline reservoir. Whereas in the other case, we'll be paying for the CO2 because we'll use it in enhanced oil recovery, so we'll recover that cost. But I think what I'm hoping is that by applying carbon capture and sequestration in enhanced oil recovery first, that we can get the technology down to the point where 45Q may be all that's needed maybe to help companies want to install the carbon capture. But ultimately, though, for some, it may take the carbon pricing.
Yeah, hey Vicki, Jeff from Sanford.
Yeah.
I just wondered if you could stick a knife in an idea that has been a real problem for our coalition, which is a lot of people will claim that CO2, EOR, is so cheap that if companies like Oxy produce more barrels from CO2, EOR, that massive cheap production is going to shift down the entire global cost curve for oil. Thus, oil will get cheap. Thus, people will buy a whole bunch more oil, and emissions will stay the same or increase. And I wondered if you thought that was good oil industry economics.
Jeff, I wish that were true. But the reality is that CO2, enhanced oil recovery, is expensive. And what's expensive is the energy cost and the cost of the CO2 right now. That's why ultimately we believe that we have the opportunity with technology to drive the CO2 cost down and to have a continuous known source from anthropogenic rather than organic. It's our goal to ultimately stop using organic and go to the anthropogenic. So that cost could come down. The way we're looking at bringing our energy costs down now is we're putting in renewables. We're putting in solar for part of our energy costs. And the reason that the energy cost is so high is we have to use compression. We have to inject the CO2 at a high enough pressure that it's miscible in the oil in the reservoir. And so it requires compression to do that. That compression uses energy, electrical energy. So that's the cost. And if you look at now, the cost of enhanced oil recovery, if you look at it on with your operating expenses and your capital expenses, it's almost right now 50 to 75% higher than some of our better resources wells. The capital intensity of the thing that's making it over time comparable to unconventional shale development is the capital intensity to offset the decline is so much lower. So right now that's making it comparable, but it is not cheaper than shale development. It's comparable because of the lower capital intensity only. So that scenario would never happen. And there's becoming a lot less enhanced oil recovery production in the world as people are going toward domestically. Right now, the shale production is higher than the conventional production in the United States.
So you don't think CO2 EOR is going to massively drop world oil prices so everybody's going to be driving SUVs for fun?
No, that will absolutely not happen, unfortunately.